Dear friends, happy Sunday and welcome back to our regular Dentro la Storia mailbag segment. Like every month, I'm back to read your most interesting, thought-provoking emails, the ones that go hand in hand with the latest episode. The one we did last month in April, which, by the way, coincided with my birthday. By the way, in the comments of that video, you flooded me with birthday wishes. I thank you all. I wasn't able to thank each of you individually, and I'm sorry for that, but I still thank you for the show of affection. It means that, all in all, I've become a small part of your lives, not to meddle in your business, but to keep you company during the day with something I hope is useful. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time with my personal matters like my birthday. So let's move on to your emails. Let's start with Franco, who is a friend of Dentro la Storia, always writes to us. And this time he writes, Dearest Federico Giovanni, since 1993 May 3rd has been World Press Freedom Day, so sincere best wishes for your celebration. Thank you. I wonder what the level of information is in Italy today. Main TV and print media lack independence, serving the government or their owners' politics. Could we still see a scoop like L'Espresso's 1967 scoop, Tintinar di Schiavoli? Ilaria Alpi and Giancarlo Ciani are two outstanding examples of journalists who are only remembered on the anniversary of their murder, which is pure hypocrisy. That is real journalism, not the pseudo-journalism like AINE or investigative talk shows that we see today. So thank you very much for your seriousness and professionalism, which are the foundation of the channel. So Franco, I thank you very much. You give me the opportunity, you tee me up to use a sports metaphor to address the topic of my profession, the journalistic profession, which is regulated by law in Italy. No, not everyone who writes is a journalist. I am one because I followed a specific path. I was first a registered freelance journalist. Then I had the chance to go through the process as a trainee. I was officially recognized as a trainee, so I was able to take the state exam. I passed both the written and oral state exams, and now I am a professional journalist. As such, I have to follow certain rules. We have an internal code of ethics within our professional body that requires us to work in a certain way. So, respecting certain vulnerable groups, starting with minors. There is a document called the Treviso Charter that requires us not to make minors who are involved in news stories identifiable. Sports news, of course, is an exception. Because in that case, as you understand, we're talking about something pleasant, something positive, because basically it highlights in a good and positive way the everyday lives of young people. Then there are other documents that give us the so-called glossary, meaning which words to use when dealing with certain topics. And it's not easy. I assure you, this is not done to impose, but out of sensitivity, to prevent our profession from being used as a bludgeon, a verbal bludgeon, against anyone, or against what is called the enemy of the day, or even worse, the latest target. The risk in the journalistic profession is exactly this, using it as a tool against someone, when in reality, and I repeat this since I started this job, the purpose of journalism is to inform, and the journalist's true point of reference is the public. That public to whom we journalists have a duty, the duty to inform, because we do not write, we do not tell stories for ourselves. We gather information, but what good is it if we keep it to ourselves, or if we write it just for ourselves? It serves no purpose. Our goal is to inform all of you. Then, of course, there are some pieces of news that can be shared, others that need to be handled more delicately, and still others that, for a higher public interest, are better not to be disclosed immediately or not to be disclosed in certain ways. You mentioned to me, for example, Tintinar di Schiavoli, the news about the attempted coup by General De Lorenzo, the Solo Plan. I remind you that the journalist who wrote that article ended up on trial. Even in that case, it was very sensitive news because it concerned a failed coup d'etat. It could have stirred up in the public, in readers, a sense of opposition toward institutions, distrust, even hostility. So you have to be very careful about how you handle certain news because there's always the risk of misunderstanding. Our job, the job of a journalist, is not to be someone's megaphone or someone's cudgel used for or against someone or something. And that's the risk. Then you mentioned Ilaria Alpi and Giancarlo Siani. By the way, we dedicated a video to Giancarlo a few years ago, which you can find on the channel. When I took the oral exam to become a professional journalist, I took it inside the headquarters of the National Order of Journalists in Rome. And at the entrance of the headquarters, there's a panel with the faces of journalists who died in the line of duty. By died in the line of duty, it means they died while still working as journalists, possibly even while actively practicing at that moment. There's the face of Giancarlo Siani, the face of Ilaria Alpi and Miran Robatin, but there are many others as well. There's Peppino Impastato, there's Maria Grazia Cutuli, there are Tony and De Paolo. There are so many of them. Because you see, when sometimes the journalism profession is denigrated, because of course there are colleagues, I admit it, who do their job poorly or who work thinking they're doing good, following a boss who makes them write certain things, sometimes even lies. Yes, there are some. But when all journalists are lumped together because of a few, since they are a minority who behave badly, who go against the core rules of our professional order and our profession, the code of ethics, and more, at that moment, a dangerous generalization is being made. It's like when we think that the entire Christian Catholic Church is made up of pedophiles just because there is a problem of pedophilia within the Catholic Church. But not all Catholic priests are pedophiles. Who said that? Where is the evidence? There isn't any. That's not the case. If we generalize, we would be making a very serious mistake. And I'm the first to say that it's not true that the entire Catholic Church is made up of pedophiles. Absolutely not. That there is a problem with pedophilia. Yes, that's established. There are investigations. There are verdicts. So there's no disputing that point. But that an entire system is made up of or supports pedophiles? No, absolutely not. In the same way, you can't say that all journalists are corrupt, that they're beholden to a boss, or that they sensationalize things for no reason. There are some like that. Some of them even, for example, you mentioned Franco, Le Iene. And here's something you may not know. Most of the members of the Le Iene editorial staff aren't even registered with Italy's Order of Journalists. You might ask, how is that possible? Well, it's clear that in Italy, the law requires certain categories to be registered with a professional body in order to practice that profession. But since there is an article, Article 21 of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of expression, this means that anyone, in various forms, can express their views even without being registered with Italy's Order of Journalists. The proof is the famous letters to the editor that used to be found in newspapers. Why are they published? Because every citizen has the full right to write, to make themselves noticed through a written piece or another means of expression addressed to the public. Because the letter to the editor is actually not addressed exclusively to the editor of a newspaper. It is addressed to the newspaper as a means of dissemination, which in fact then publishes it. In the same way, bloggers, who for the most part are not registered with the association, and people on certain shows are not registered with the Journalists Association. That's why they can sometimes depart from the rules we follow, especially our ethical standards and others as well. After all, they're not required to follow them. They're not part of the association. They can't even be sanctioned if they don't follow them. But let's not generalize. Let's try to understand for a moment. And then let's remember one thing. You are the ones who have the power to choose. As I was saying, you are the audience we answer to. If we disappoint you, you have the option to choose not to watch us anymore, not to listen to us anymore, not to read us anymore, not to buy that particular newspaper. Don't watch that particular TV show. You are free to choose. And you are the ones who can say whether you like it or not. That's all. Personally, I don't judge too harshly what certain colleagues do. I can say that I don't like relentless talk shows every single night, sometimes even those loud talk shows, where guests talk over each other and insult each other. I really don't like that. It's something that doesn't resonate with me. But I understand that some broadcasters look at the Auditel ratings and realize that kind of show can appeal to a certain audience. And since they have to sell advertising to make a living and cover expenses, they ride the wave of controversy. But I repeat, it's up to you. Let me remind you of something else. In the 1920s and 1930s, there was no television yet, but there was radio. And radio was a very powerful tool for spreading information. A tool so powerful that it was used by the rulers of the time in very different ways. Because while the likes of Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco shouted on the radio, they used a method which was to raise their voices, to always be stronger than others, even vocally, to exaggerate with words and concepts, to shake, to amaze, even to terrify. They did not win. They were no longer the ones who had the final say. The last word belonged to those democracies that didn't shout on the radio. There was King George VI of the United Kingdom, who stuttered. You remember the King's Speech, who even with his weaknesses and difficulties, conveyed a sense of security and comfort to his people. The last word also belonged to someone who came close to seeing victory, but missed it by just a few months. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States, who with his fireside chats, also with a calm tone, reassured his nation. First about the very severe economic crisis, then regarding the threats coming from Europe, from these strong, evil, violent winds. Calmness, composure, relevance, and pertinence are qualities that we journalists should never forget. Because it's easy to promote shouting, sensationalism, and violence. It's very easy, much harder to speak with a calm voice, explaining and making our listeners think. But what's the difference? Because those who make people think actually show with their method that another world is possible, that reasoning and intellect are superior to any kind of violence. And in the end, intelligence wins over brute force. Anyway, once again, thanks to Franco for giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic, and thanks to Journalists' Day, which was celebrated last May 3rd. Let's go to another email from Leonardo, who writes, I'm one of your channel's many subscribers. I followed the fascinating miniseries about the liberation in Italy, and I wanted to ask about the history of the liberation from Nazi fascism. If in the future you ever make a video where you talk about Operation Herring, the operation of the Italian paratroopers behind the Gothic Line during the last days of the war, or about the Battle of Monte Casale, known as the final battle in the War of Liberation between the partisans and Germans. I think these are two very interesting topics, which unfortunately are not very well known, but they made a major contribution to the liberation of Italy. And I would be very grateful if you talked about them on your famous channel. Thank you for the compliment then, Leonardo. I thank you for the email and also for the suggestions. Clearly, we wanted to make a mini series that, if it included everything, wouldn't be mini anymore. It would have been a continuous series. Moreover, we've slowed down production a bit, as I already mentioned in March, due to some needs related to our private lives. We used to make a few more videos per month before, but now we've slightly reduced our monthly video production from 9 to 6. It's clear that we couldn't talk about everything. However, both Operation Herring, which is a very particular episode, and the Battle of Monte Casale are certainly important, but there are also others where the partisans openly challenge the German troops. These are episodes that deserve to be told. So I take note of the suggestions, and to everyone, if you have any suggestions, something you'd like to see covered and hasn't been covered yet. Because sometimes you write to me, talk about a certain topic, and the video's already there. I have to tell you thank you, but the video's already on the channel. Maybe you haven't noticed also because the channel actually has hundreds and hundreds of videos. I can understand that it's a bit difficult to find them all. So, if you have any suggestions for topics that haven't been covered yet, I'd be happy to hear them, so please write to me. I'm only happy about it. It's something that's useful to me, first of all, because it motivates me. Maybe I'll go and dig up some documents I had or some books I have in my library somewhere that I bought some time ago. I had started them, then I left them there because I had other things to do. I'm only happy about it, so don't worry, just write anyway. Thanks again to Leonardo. I'll take your suggestions and think about them for future programming. Also, because we at Dentro La Storia schedule and prepare the program month by month. Of course, sometimes we put out a quick video if a particular event requires it, but generally we prepare month by month. I can tell you, for example, that the schedule for June is practically already done, then we'll do July and August. Thanks again. I'll finish with one last email I received from Marco, and Marco writes to me. Well, I'll skip the first part because otherwise it's the usual compliments. He writes, Dear Federico, the question I want to ask you is something that many people wonder about, but few sometimes have the courage to ask. Nice expression. I like that one. The question is, but is Italy really a democracy? Because I keep hearing from various sources that, according to some observers, we are a sort of country with limited sovereignty, subject to other powers. So democracy would not really exist here, except as a facade. What do you think? That's a very intriguing question then. This story of limited sovereignty began several decades ago. It arose as a result of certain events and was later revived and fueled by other occurrences. It's clear that Italy, after the Second World War, agreed to join a system that was initially bipolar, the First World, the capitalist one, against the Second World, the socialist one. Italy's entry into the First World, and thus into the Atlantic Pact in 1949. The opportunity to receive Marshall Plan resources, first of all for reconstruction, and for socio-economic and industrial recovery. The close connection, however, with the United States of America fueled the issue of limited sovereignty. A limited sovereignty that developed over a long period of time. Through an unwritten but implicit ban, certain political forces, specifically the Communist Party, were kept out of government. Clearly, that was the logic of a bipolar world. The Italian Communist Party, just like the French Communist Party, which were the two strongest communist parties in Western Europe, not just in terms of size, represented a problem. In Washington, it was sometimes seen as a sort of fifth column for Moscow, ready to strike from behind. History has shown that it wasn't exactly like that, but it took time. Because if we think about Budapest in 1956, there, the Italian Communist Party sided in favor of the Soviet intervention, which was heavily criticized, but in Prague, in 1968, everything changed. That was where the first break from Moscow happened. The critical stance, the ability to clearly criticize what was a brutal intervention. It wasn't an anti-revolutionary intervention. It was an intervention aimed at establishing Soviet ideological and political dominance over another country, without giving this country the chance to think for itself, to stand on its own feet, to choose, even while wanting to remain in the socialist world, to choose another path to socialism. So can we say that this limited sovereignty did exist during the Cold War period? Sometimes it comes back even today. Think of the recent subservient positions our country has taken regarding some decisions from Washington. These are positions that should be discussed because sometimes they defy logic, like the position on trade tariffs that harm the export economy. Our country is not a producer. It is a country that exports finished and semi-finished goods. So it imports raw materials and processes them. But it doesn't process them just for the domestic market. It processes them also, and above all, for export. So this means that accepting the tariff system is like clipping the wings of our manufacturing industry, which of course doesn't pay the tariff directly. The tariff is paid by the importer, not the exporter, but the market shrinks because the product costs more. It's very simple. You see, these positions can be seen as a limited sovereignty, but I would also add another kind of limited sovereignty that can sometimes be a bit annoying. I was told that. Limited sovereignty is also when you accept the interference of others in the making of laws. And so I have to think about the divorce law and the related repeal referendum, which failed in the early 70s, the abortion law, and here too, another referendum which was also rejected. Then what else is there? Assisted procreation, same-sex marriage. In this case, The interference comes from the Vatican, but for some people that's fine. It's acceptable. Why? Religious faith, but if you accept this, then you should also accept another, opposite kind of interference, maybe from people of other religious faiths. Are you in favor of those issues, or are you in favor of other issues that are in contrast with the religious morals of that particular faith? Here, too, we're in a bit of a difficult area with overlaps that aren't always accepted or that are sometimes imposed as if they were natural. It's always about sovereignty, though theoretically limited. If a state is not free to legislate without some other actor, external or deeply internal, yet still outside the institutions of the state, intervening, then you understand that sovereignty isn't really that free. I would say that the best example is France under de Gaulle, which distanced itself from the Atlantic Pact, especially from Washington, while remaining militarily within the NATO system, but politically keeping its distance and embracing a concept of secularism that allows for discussion of topics, even bioethics, without the constant and sometimes oppressive interference of certain ecclesiastical hierarchies. Will we, as Italy, ever have the courage to do as our cousins across the Alps have done? I ask myself this, and I ask you as well. Would you have the courage to do what the French have done? Would you have the courage to give up certain forms of interference, certain stances, certain suggestions, sometimes subtle but persistent? Think about it. If you want to tell me, write to me. Here are my contact details, fbettuzzi@dentrolastoria.net, and I'll see you in the next episode of Casella di Dentro la Storia. So remember, when you write to me, in the subject of the email, write La Posta di Dulles or Dulles Posta so that I can select your emails. Once again, have a good Sunday, everyone, and talk to you soon.